Live from MMA Fighting Studios, this is Between the Links. And now, your host, Mike Heck.
The iconic voice of Esther Lynn welcomes you to a brand new edition of Between the Links. Thank you for joining us on another Thursday. This week, we're still feeling the hangover effect from UFC 286. The welterweight division has been turned upside down with a contender that came out of nowhere since we last spoke on the show. We have a massive Bantamweight main event coming up in a little over 48 hours. A lot to talk about as we have some inter-website infighting on the program this week. So let us introduce the contestants. First, he's Mr. No Gray Area, the exhibition king, the hot take king. He's from No Bets Bar. Damn, they were good here on MMAfighting.com. He is Mr. Jed Meshew, fresh off his victory last week. Hello, Jed. How are you?
I'm doing great. This music reminded me that Price is Right is coming to Atlanta pretty soon. And I got to tell you, your boy is going to be there. I'm going to figure out a way to get up there on Contestants Row. And then we can have a new name for me. Price is Right champion Jed Meshew.
Mr. Showcase Showdown?
Oh, I've been preparing my whole life for the Showcase Showdown.
Is this like the real show? Like Drew Carey's going to be there? Or is this one of the traveling road shows that they do?
I've been told it's the real show. I can neither confirm nor deny it. But somebody told me that this week. It was like, Price is Right's coming. I was like, well, I got to figure out how to be a part of this. So be on the lookout, guys. 11 a.m. just for the next 6 months. Just keep watching Price is Right on, I want to say CBS. Not even entirely sure that's the channel. But keep your eyes peeled because I'm coming one day.
I'm so excited.
Phenomenal drop.
Oh, man. And back on the show, the OG himself from Fighter vs. Writer with the great Matt Brown, also from MMAfighting.com, Mr. Damon Martin. Hello, sir. Welcome back to the program, my man.
I'm ready to talk MMA, but now I'm like really excited to talk about Price is Right. Because I actually know a guy who got on Price is Right. I used to work with him, and he won some prizes and then got wiped out in the taxes he had to pay on the prizes. So good luck with that, Jed.
Ooh, I would have assumed that they don't even give you prizes. They just give you like a dollar amount equal to the value of the prizes, because it seems much simpler than being like, here's your jet ski, figure out how to get it back to your home or whatever.
Always pass on the first showcase. Always pass.
Never.
Really any good.
Never.
You might get a cool trip and maybe like an outdoor hot tub.
If there's a dinette set, no, I'm not involved in the dinette set at all. Even though as I'm like older and I recognize like actually that I could use that would be like a functional item. After that, I want some type of trashy ass cruise to Greece. Let's do it.
Oh, man. Well, the actual retail price for UFC 286 was $74.99 plus taxes, and it ended.
Ooh, I paid $79.99, Mike. Did I get ripped off?
Oh, man. $79.99. See, I was doing the watch party, so I didn't even know. But for those who spent $79.99 plus tax, you watched Leon Edwards defeat Kamaru Usman via majority decision in the main event. He wins the trilogy, wins the rivalry, retains the welterweight championship, and a lot has come out of this, and we will save the aftermath of what is next for Leon Edwards, at least for right now, for round 2. But Damon, I want to start with you because Leon Edwards, as we've talked about many times, he is a guy that has had to scratch and claw his way to a title fight, leaped over every hurdle put in front of him, wins the title with this iconic comeback knockout, this memory we will never forget in the sport. And that led to so many questions coming into this fight. And Leon answered a lot of those questions and officially put Kamaru Usman behind him for good. So what was your biggest takeaway from the fight and Leon's first successful title defense and the big win?
Honestly, what impressed me most about, two things in particular with Leon impressed me with this fight. One was his confidence, because I think even though he won the last one, the headshot dead, we all know about that. It was a very iconic moment, but he was losing that fight and he was down 3.5 rounds by the point he got the knockout. So I think getting that knockout instilled him with a lot of confidence because he fought Kamaru with a lot more confidence this time. He fought, in belief in himself that he could win, that he could go out there and beat Kamaru Usman again and do it without, the late theatrics that he did in the second fight. And then also, I think, obviously, everyone's going to talk about it, but the takedown defense. I mean, that was just a huge difference in this fight he shucked off Usman so many times, and even when Usman did get him down momentarily, he got right back to his feet. Now, I will say, I had a conversation with Gilbert Burns last night. We were talking about the fight, and he was saying that, something looked a little off with Usman in his takedowns. He wasn't really committing to his takedowns. He wasn't driving through his takedowns, and I think there is maybe a legitimate question about that, maybe in terms of like his knees, or was he just, worried about the head kick, or worried about the kick, so he was being wary of diving for the legs kind of thing. I don't know, but the takedown defense was on point, and it was far different than the second fight where he got taken down at will, especially in the second, third, and fourth rounds. So it was just a stark contrast. Now, ultimately, it still came down to a very close fight, though. I actually scored it a draw because of the point deduction for the fence grab. So I had it 47-47. So all these things I'm raving about Leon Edwards, it wasn't like it was a blowout. Kamaru Usman was right there and easily could have won the fight with one more round. So it was still a very good fight, very close fight. But that's really what I took away from Leon Edwards.
Jed, what say you? Biggest takeaway from Leon's big win?
Ooh, that's a good question, right? I think there are a lot of ways you can go with this. I think the biggest one, and it's not by a large margin over many of the others, though, I think that Leon might have had a point with what he was saying coming in. He was saying that the altitude really messed me up. It was a huge factor. I don't think a ton of people gave him credence for it, in part because the truth is, if that is objectively all the way true, if the altitude really made it hard on Leon, he has no one but himself to blame. Like they are both competing in the same cage in the same area. That's on him to have better prepared. So if that was the cost of it, then okay. But I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of dismissed it as, okay, like I'm sure it didn't help, but realistically, you just kept getting backed up to the fence and he kept wrestling you, and there you go. And then we look at this one, and one of the most notable things, like right out of the gate, is how much movement Leon is showing. Leon, and whether that's because he felt he had more energy or it was purely that he recognized how bad last fight went for him, he was never stationary. He was circling constantly. It was a struggle for Usman to get him backed up to the fence. And his coaches told him that in the rematch, said, hey, you stop backing up. And he just kept backing up. And so to see the difference in that here, it felt a little bit like it was, okay, maybe he really wasn't prepared for the altitude. And fatigue makes cowards of us all, is the old saying. And it was easier for Usman to back him up. In this fight, it was a lot harder. And I think some of that is from the movement. I will also say some of it is maybe to Jorge Masvidal's point. He said yesterday on Joe Rogan, Usman might have come back a little too soon. And I thought Leon was flashing the head kick early to give Usman the fear. And he did not come in with the same level of confidence, it looked like to me, that we've seen from Kamaru Usman. He looked like he got frustrated in there repeatedly with his inability to kind of get to the dominant positions he had such success with in the rematch. He looked frustrated with the real difficulty he had cornering Leon, because he got there eventually, but it was work. And all the while he's getting kicked in the legs a bunch. He's eating snap kicks up front a bunch. And so I think a lot of this is the first fight, we all said it wasn't the second fight wasn't a fluke, the outcome. Like that was a prepared and a thing that happened. But I think most people, myself included, thought that's not a high outcome fight. Like if they fight that fight 10 times, the outcome is not Leon pulling that off, most of them. But I think looking at this fight, the true answer is Leon wins more often than he loses against Kamaru Usman, based on the style, based on the skills he's bringing to the table, maybe based on where they're at athletically in their age range, their gaps right now. But there was no mistake. It maybe happened in an unconventional or unexpected way, but it wasn't. There's no mistake in Leon Edwards winning. He is the best welterweight in the planet right now.
Let me, if you mind, if you throw this out there real quick, Jed, to your point, great point about the kicks. I wasn't thinking about this, but something else that Gilbert Burns said, to give him credit for this, is that he said that, Leon was targeting the kicks to the legs and to the body early in the fight to get in Kamaru's head about the head kick. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I wonder if that didn't play a huge part in Kamaru not wanting to commit to takedowns, not wanting to commit to his punches, because he was fearing that head kick. And to your point, that's a great example of, even like the knockout, like coming back too soon from the knockout, not so much like in terms of a concussion. I'm saying like in terms of the mentality of like being feared of hitting the head kick again. And Gilbert made a great point saying like he was kicking to the body really hard, kicking to the legs, He's like, A, that diminishes your cardio and your conditioning by hitting you to the body constantly. And two, probably even bigger, is that it gets in his head that he's going to go up high again. And we remember when John Jones made that big point about a tendency that Daniel Cormier had when he tried to go, went for a certain combination, he would duck his head and it left him open for a head kick. Then when they did the rematch, Jones hit him with that exact kick. Like, exactly, got in his head. Daniel made the mistake, and John made him pay for it. I think there was a little bit of that in this one. So much was made of the head kick. It got in Kamaru's head. He had to stop the head kick, and he forgot to stop other things.
I fully agree. Because just like, dude, like 80% of fighting is confidence. Like, you have to have the requisite skills, but one of those dudes looked a lot more confident in the second and third round in what they were doing, and it wasn't Kamaru Usman. And I think a lot of it was just he ate a bunch of kicks. It was his first fight. Like, I don't think we made a big enough deal about it. It was mentioned, but like, first time he's ever been knocked out. And this wasn't GSP tapping to strikes, getting knocked out, which still he went to a sports psychologist that had totally messed with his head. This was cold, like woke up in a different universe than the one he was previously in. And I don't think we gave that as much credence as we should, because to me, it looked like a different Kamaru Usman, mentality-wise, confidence-wise, and the same respect. It looked like Leon Edwards was as confident as I've ever seen him. It was not, he was not trying to point fight. He was executing a game plan, and a really good one.
Jed, longtime listeners of this program and many others on the MMA Fighting Network know that you were the driver of the nobody cares about Leon Edwards train. You never said he was a bad fighter or anything like that, but you always thought he was a fighter that could never be a star. He can never get over that hump. And it wasn't his resume or his skills necessarily that kept him from title fights. It was the fact that you just felt that nobody cared, wasn't really interesting. Do you feel differently now, Jed? Has he shown you something over the last several months that has changed your mind?
Yes and no. So there's a little bit. At some point, you just got to walk back a take as strong as that one. But the truth is, I stand by a lot of what I said, particularly at the time I said it, because here's the deal, man. There's a reason that it took him forever to get to a title fight, and it's not because the UFC was too worried that he would make the sport boring because he's so good. It was because he wasn't a compelling fighter. That doesn't mean he's a bad fighter. We see this all the time. John Fitch was an excellent fighter, incredibly uncompelling to watch in the cage. Leon Edwards, not the same kind of, and that's the thing, we usually associate that with like lay and pray guys, and that's not really Leon's game, though he can do it if he needs to. He just isn't compelling. Here's what I'll point to. Look at his current win streak, which is great, undeniable, whatever it is, 12 fights or wherever, we're unbeaten. There are 3 finishes in it. One of them being the all-time head kick of Kamaru Usman. That's a highlight you can never take away. And sometimes that's all it takes, one big moment, and that's about as big a moment as you can have. But prior to that, we're looking at he submitted Albert Tumanov. I mean, okay, in 2016, that's fine. And then he finished Peter Sabata, and the rest of it is he's winning decisions, like not even compelling decisions over RDA or Gunnar Nelson or Nate Diaz, where the fight was really bad. Like, that fight was mostly awful to watch, and the only compelling part was the last minute where it looked like Leon was getting boxed up. So I think that that's still here. The difference is, part of being compelling and interesting is being in situations that are undeniably compelling and interesting, right? Like, when you are fighting Peter Sabata, you're going to have to do something for people to care because Peter Sabata. It's a very different calculus if you're fighting Kamaru Usman for the welterweight title. And the truth is, if Usman had spent another minute and not gotten kicked in the head in the rematch, then this is done. Leon Edwards is never a champion. People aren't having this, let's reevaluate his career and where we're at moment. Usman is moving on to whatever. Leon goes back to the bottom of the line. And we all think of him as, okay, he lost an awful fight, like a fight that was very not compelling or interesting. Instead, he pulls that out, and that starts to shape the narrative because he gave us, in my opinion, the greatest comeback and the greatest head kick knockout in the history of MMA. Like, that means something. And now he got to headline an event in London where, look, it's the sports nationalist in a lot of ways. Like, People were there for him because he's the champion and England is going to rally around him. And so to that extent, he gets to be a star. He's an English champion. That's going to give you pull and leverage in some ways. I still have a lot of questions on a lot of doubts, not really questions. I strongly doubt that he is going to settle in a major way with markets outside of England, but that doesn't really matter for him at this point. He's done the thing. He did the thing. He's got the belt. He's the champion. If they let him fight Jorge Masvidal, maybe he could build something up. But as we're going to talk about in just a minute here, that doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm not really sure he's ever going to resonate with the fan base at large.
Damon, what do you think about that? And again, we'll talk about the aftermath and what Dana White said in round 2, but do you feel like Leon has done enough to become, I guess, a guy that can carry this division for the foreseeable future? Do you think a lot of that narrative about him being not really interesting, boring, do you think that's changed since the second Usman fight?
To a certain extent. It has, because we got to see the head kick. And the second fight with Usman was actually a really, really good fight. And he showed us a lot of skills, and he showed us he could beat Kamaru Usman without pulling off the late theatrics in the 5th round. But at the same time, the championship brings a certain amount of star power and interest to everybody, but it doesn't put you over the top. The guys or the girls who are superstars typically become superstars outside of being a champion. And then if you do become more of a star when you're a champion, it's because you built a certain resume that people are impressed by it. In Kamaru Usman's case was a great example. He became the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. He had that huge knockout over Jorge Masvidal that kind of put him over the top, and he kind of became a bit of a mythical figure in that way because of a couple of great performances, and also because he became the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the sport. And every single fighter underneath him, whether you're talking about flyweights, bantamweights, lightweights, heavyweights, whoever, they would inevitably have to mention him if they talked about pound for pound, because that conversation constantly comes up, whether it's Volkanovski or whoever else it is. So you're constantly being mentioned as the best guy in the world. So I think that Leon has some time to build that kind of cachet. But the problem is that, when you go into a fight like this and you're already not a super well-known guy and you don't have a huge amount of fan support outside of maybe your home country, and even that is relatively new. I mean, we always forget he got booed in a fight against Gunnar Nelson in London. That was a few years ago. It wasn't like this was like a decade ago. He got booed in his own home country, facing a guy who's not from England. So we got to remember that, Leon will have a certain amount of fan support just because he's the champion, and obviously now just because he's from England. But I don't know that it's going to transcend to where he's going to become suddenly a pay-per-view draw, or people are going to consider him must-see TV. I think it's really going to come down to where they put him, meaning are they going to continue to book him in English, crazy, awesome fan reactions, or are they going to book him in compelling fights that people actually care about, which, as we're going to talk about here soon, comes to the Colby Covington factor, which I have a lot of thoughts on that one as well. But I think that, the Masvidal fight probably would have been much bigger. But I think it's got to be those kind of things, those kind of rivalry fights that will draw people to see him fight beyond just being Leon Edwards, the welterweight champion.
Now, Damon, where does Kamaru Usman go from here? Because it seems like his legacy is set in stone as the second best welterweight of all time. It's kind of hard to argue that at this point. He's talked in the past about not having a lot of time left in the sport. He obviously has a bright future outside of the cage, whether it be in the acting world in front of the camera or in front of the camera on a broadcast team for whether it's the UFC or some other combat sports organization. He's very good at that stuff. And it seems like after Saturday, he wants to reflect a little bit, but it seems like he wants to keep this train moving. So where does he go from Saturday? Do you think he fights again? And if so, what kinds of matchups make sense for him right now?
So my heart of hearts, I thought if Kamaru Usman lost on Saturday, he would retire. I just believe that, not because I think he's done or that he's washed up or anything crazy like that. I just think when you reach a certain pinnacle in the sport and then you come down from that, a lot of guys and a lot of girls don't really want to try that climb again. Kamaru's 35, 36 now. He knows he's at the tail end of his career. Whether he's at the end of his career or not is debatable, but he knows he's at the tail end of his career. And he's already had his biggest rivalry fights with Masvidal and Colby, and he's vanquished both those guys twice. So there's not going to be a lot of interest in running either of those back for a third time. On A lot of people have mentioned middleweight, with his wrestling. Immediately he jumps in there and he's right alongside, probably Khamzat Chimaev is like one of the best wrestlers at 185 pounds, but I still think the size difference would hurt him a little bit. He's not a massive guy for middleweight, so I think that would be an interesting move if he decides to go there. But I think it really just comes down to, matchups at this point. I think, I know Belal Muhammad mentioned, if he doesn't get Colby, he doesn't get the title shot, Usman's a fight he would be interested in taking. I think that's a potentially interesting matchup out there for him. I think there's other welterweights coming up. Like, you could say Shavkat Rakhmonov. Like, I think Shavkat against Usman actually makes more sense than Shavkat versus Belal, because if Shavkat beats Usman, then you do have a 100% number one contender. And if Usman can vanquish a real high-level prospect like Shavkat, he can answer a lot of questions and say, I'm not done. I'm still going to get back to the title. And I said this before, I like Leon Edwards very much. And I'll be the first to admit I was probably right behind Jed in the no one really cares about Leon Edwards thing, but I really like Leon. Here's the problem, though, is that I don't know how long his reign is going to last, just because of how volatile this division can be. And he could lose to Colby Covington. He could lose to Belal Muhammad. He could lose to Shavkat Rakhmonov. So I don't know how long his reign's going to last, where we're talking about matchmaking in the future of Usman Edwards 4. But I do think Usman could get back in there. But I think the Shavkat fight would be the one I would make. Or if he wants to test middleweight, try it out. I mean, like I said, there's not a long path to the title when you think about it. I mean, Chimaev is already like one fight away from the title, and he hasn't even fought there in like 2.5 years.
Jed, what do you think? Does he fight again? And if so, is he fighting at middleweight? Does he stay at welterweight? What makes sense?
I assume that if he fights again, it's at middleweight. I think I said that coming in. I just don't see the appeal of fighting at welterweight. If he wants to take one at welterweight, given that Colby Covington appears to be next in line for the welterweight title fight, because if Colby beats Leon, then Kamaru would seemingly have to fight Colby for the belt. If Colby will accept that fight, which I don't know that he would, because he would clearly be trying to fight Conor McGregor at that point. So maybe he wants to spin his wheels. He takes a fight at welterweight, and I mean, he can win any of them. I think it depends where he thinks he's going. It feels like Shavkat is going to be fighting Belal Muhammad. That seems like that's the next avenue forward. At which point, you could just do Usman versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. They're two dudes who never fought. Old heads in the division seems like the thing to do. It's fine, go with that. But I think the thing that makes more sense is to try and make another title run, and the easier it would at least appear avenue for that will be a middleweight. It's not as good of a division as welterweight. The champion right now ostensibly looks like somebody that Usman should at least have some stylistic matchups against. Obviously, if Izzy wins this rematch against Pereira coming up next 2 weeks or whatever from now, that changes the math. So I think that 287 will determine a lot. If Izzy wins, then I doubt Usman moves up for that. But if Izzy doesn't, I suspect we're going to see Usman moving on. I would like to just pivot this conversation entirely, though, because you said something, Mike, and I think I said it before 286. And I have since sort of reconsidered, certainly after the loss to Leon. Kamaru Usman's not the second best welterweight in the world. Or at least I don't think we should be at all confident that he's the second best welterweight of all time. Matt Hughes, his resume still holds up exceedingly well. And we all kind of bought into this narrative when they were trying to push that Kamaru is better than GSP, which was insane and still is. But if you go back and look at Matt Hughes, I am in no way sure that Kamaru Usman is the second greatest welterweight of all time. He's at worst the third. He's certainly no lower than 3. But I would love to hear, because I believe previously Damon had stated that he thought Usman was better than GSP. And I want to know if he still holds to this belief post Leon Edwards. And I want to know how he feels about where Usman ranks historically relative to Matt Hughes. Because as I went back over it, I frankly put Matt Hughes above Kamaru Usman in the historical welterweight rankings right now.
Well, I think,
what do you think about that?
I think skill for skill, I would, Usman is why
when
I think of him being better than GSP. In terms of second best welterweight of all time, I still think it's Kamaru Usman. And I know here's what's going to happen with the whole Matt Hughes conversation is that, and I'm going to bring it up, even though I'm not as adamant about this as some other people are. But obviously, I think the level of competition has raised a lot since Matt Hughes was on top of the world, winning by, his opponent falling off the top of the cage and then power bombing him on the canvas and waking up first to become champion.
One of the funniest outcomes in MMA history. Just an incredible way to win a belt.
Yeah, Matt Hughes
I
has
woke
some
up
impressive.
first.
Yeah, I won. Matt Hughes has some impressive wins on his resume. He definitely does. But he was also, again, in that era, he had a lot of fights in there that he should not have had. Like there's fights on Hughes' record where you're like, why was he fighting this guy? And Hughes has talked about this openly after he suffered his first loss. Pat Miletich was his coach, and he knowingly put him in there against tomato cans to build his confidence back up.
Well,
so
yeah.
Matt Hughes fought a little different era. And when you look at his title defenses, does he have some good wins in there? Sure. But, and again, I don't necessarily bang the drum as much as some people do about this, but I think in this current era of mixed martial arts, Matt Hughes would probably and again, I understand people evolve and get better, blah, blah, blah. But in this current era of welterweight, Matt Hughes would barely be top 10 in terms of who he could compete with his skill level. He was very limited in his skill set at welterweight. And I just think that when you look at, he beat Hayato Max Sakurai, great win, but how much of a win, how much of a legacy win is that really when you start breaking down how good both guys were at that time? So again,
that's a pretty big legacy win. I think that was the win that made him the top pound for pound fighter in the sport. At the time.
But looking back on it,
was on fire.
Does it still hold the same relevancy? I don't know. I guarantee you there's 1,000 people who are going to watch this right now and say, who is Hayato Max Sakurai? I guarantee that.
Dude, nobody watching this has any idea who Maka is, but
and I'm not disrespecting Max Sakurai. I'm saying Max Sakurai was again a good win, but I'm saying comparatively to today's wins, I'm just not sure. And again, we all have revisionist history, right? Because Kamaru Usman has now lost 2 in a row to Leon Edwards. Suddenly, we're going to have this conversation. He's not as good as we all thought he was once. When we kind of forget the last fight, the second fight between them ended after Kamaru was dominating for 3.5 rounds and then got head kicked. And this fight, he lost in a majority decision that a lot of people, myself included, scored a draw. So it's not like he got blown out of the water and he's suddenly looking like he's past his prime and he's a bum. So I still put him number 2. Hughes is probably 3, and it's not a disrespect that Hughes is 3. I just think that when you look at the entire body of work beyond just his title defenses, Hughes had a lot of bad losses as well later in his career. And I understand everyone likes to discount losses later in your career, but I'm sorry, if you keep fighting, it still counts. And he did not end his career very well going out of the UFC. So again, like I said, I don't think it's a huge debate, but I still put Usman number 2 all time.
Yeah. I think I understand the arguments. My thing is, one, Hughes is, yes, all his first 20 fights are mostly not relevant to the conversation outside of the fact that he was very busy. But I just forgot how many title defenses he had over 2 reigns, but 7 total title defenses, I think, is the number. And against this was always my big knock on Usman. I think he would have beaten a lot of dudes. In reality, we just saw him fight Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington twice. And then Gilbert Burns was also in there. It was I think he would have beaten a lot of the other top welterweights, but the one time he fought some dude that wasn't Masvidal or Covington, he's now lost to him twice. So it's whereas Matt Hughes at least was fighting different dudes Sean Shirk. That's, you can quibble with it, but at the time it was a very quality win. Sakurai, very quality win. Freak fights, great. One of it, he did it after getting a blatant low blow, which was incredible. He gets the beat. He's beaten BJ and George St. Pierre. I think Matt Hughes, we all sort of wrote off, which is the point here of my comment of and I did it myself. It was we all just sort of got rid of it because the narrative was, is Usman better than GSP? So we sort of presumed that made him at least the second best. I'm really, really not sure. I think historically Matt Hughes is a better welterweight. I'm sorry to derail your show, Mike.
Well, you also got to mix in. You also got to, again, listen, you're right. I think the BJ Penn win stands very well. I think the George St. Pierre win, obviously very early in his career, stands very well. But looking at his record, again, you got Gil Castillo in there. No one remembers Gil Castillo. Joe Riggs. I know Joe Riggs is the man of the hour.
Great win at the time.
Gil
Castillo was a mid-win.
Yeah, the guy who should be fighting Jake Paul, according to certain reporters. Joe Riggs is out there. That's not Hoist Gracie. When Hoist Gracie
you talking about the Fight Master? you talking about the fight master Joe Riggs?
Yes. Hanato Ceruto
One of one.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a few people on his resume. Like you look at the BJ Penn win, that's a great win. You look at George St. Pierre, even early in his career, that's a great win. But then he's littered with guys that you're kind of like, who? And I think when you look at Usman beating Gilbert Burns pretty definitively, a guy who went out there and did that, which is a good win on his record. Being the first person and the only person to ever knock out Jorge Masvidal. And again, Jorge Masvidal may not be the greatest, but he's still a veteran stalwart in both lightweight and welterweight. To knock him out, become the first guy ever to knock him out means something. So again, we're quibbling over minor details, but that's why I still put Usman ahead of Hughes overall.
Here's a question. I'm really just taking the show away from you, Mike, and I don't care.
I know why, but go ahead.
Because Joe Rogan said a real dumb thing, shockingly, the other day about how Jorge Masvidal is better than George St. Pierre, which is just like objectively false in just about every possible way that could be. If you took prime Matt Hughes against prime and or modern day Masvidal, does Masvidal win? Because I don't think he does. I think I would pick Matt Hughes to just tackle Masvidal for 5 rounds or whatever. Is that a crazy thought?
I don't think it's crazy, but I don't think it's one-way traffic. I think it's a winnable fight for Masvidal because Matt Hughes
is winnable, certainly.
Matt Hughes was a really, really terrible striker. Really, bad. So if he can't get him down, he's getting lit up on the feet. So that's really what you're coming down to. Can he get him
Matt
down
Hughes
before
could knock out fucking Hoist?
He was obviously slightly better than Ben Askren in striking, but it's not a far cry to say they were very similar in their striking skills. So yeah, I think it really comes down to, can he get him down before Masvidal hits him with a flying knee or something?
Yeah. Well, interesting topic, but I know why you try to hijack the show, Jed, but we have to.
I don't want to do it.
We have to talk about it. Let's move on to the story of the week. Point for round number 2 goes to round number 1, excuse me. Damon Martin for not hijacking the show.
For not stealing the show. It's fair.
Man.
Fair.
Yes. Of course, the story of UFC 286 was about Leon Edwards in the aftermath for about 30 minutes because he gets the win, and it seemed like there were a lot of very interesting options for him. And it seemed like the UFC 287 matchup between Gilbert Burns and the aforementioned Jorge Masvidal had some massive stakes, especially for Masvidal. That fight became infinitely bigger once Leon Edwards got his hand raised. But the stakes in that fight became massive for only a few minutes because at the UFC 286 post-fight press conference, Dana White goes up. He is asked who is next, and normally we don't make fights the day of the fight. Dana made a fight the day of the fight, named Colby Covington, the man who surprisingly weighed in as the backup for the main event. Colby Covington is the number 1 contender, and according to Dana, nothing will change that, even if Jorge Masvidal just obliterates Gilbert Burns at UFC 287. So, Jed, you are not happy with this. Colby has done some media since that announcement, including with us here at MMAfighting.com, and he has been making a lot of noise. So I guess my question is, do you feel any differently 5 days later than you did Saturday night? And I guess my other question is, why are people so surprised by this?
We're surprised by it because we're dipshits. I say we because I'm absolutely among them. No, not any cooler with this. I don't care enough to let this really affect my day or bother me. But it's objectively dumb, and I wish we weren't here. These are the sorts of fights. Let's go back to old Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes fought Royce Gracie in the UFC, which was at the time widely laughed at. But the reason he did it is there was nobody else for him to fight. Like, there really weren't other viable contenders for him at welterweight. And so it was like, hey, we get to do this kind of fun thing. And that's where this fight belongs. Colby Covington, by no reasonable metric, deserves a title fight right now. At least not with the vigor with which it has been bestowed upon him. Because Jorge Masvidal sits in waiting. And I'm not here to tell you that Jorge Masvidal deserves a title fight on merit. But if he beats Gilbert Burns, 1, it's a better win than Colby Covington has in the last 5 years. And 2, there's a baked-in story, and the champion wants the fight. The champion actively has no interest in fighting Colby Covington because Colby Covington hasn't beaten anybody other than Jorge Masvidal in 5 years. And so there's no reason to push this. This is a fight that would make sense if there were not other viable contenders. If Leon Edwards had cleaned out the division and we're trying to figure somebody else out, or if it's a short notice, we need somebody who's going to try and gin up some interest, who's going to say something real dumb, who's going to threaten to murder one of our employees. That's a great look for us as an organization. We need that guy to try and boost our pay-per-view and whatever they can. But that's not the case. This isn't short notice. And there's not a dearth of challengers available. There are at least 2 other dudes in this weight class who outright just deserve a title fight right now. Bilal Muhammad deserves a title fight right now based on merit and based on how the sport should work meritocratically. Shavkat Rakhmonov, exactly the same. Add in Khamzat Chimaev, who seems to still believe he can make it welterweight, but Dana White is just like, no. I don't really know why the UFC is just like, no, not going to do it. They've let plenty of other people catastrophically miss weight and then still go back to doing things. So I truly just don't understand the impetus here, in part because I don't believe we have ever seen real metrics that show that Colby Covington drives the kind of interest to demand something like this. I could at least accept it or understand it. Maybe not accept it, but understand it if we're talking Conor McGregor. If Conor McGregor beats Michael Chandler, does he deserve a welterweight title fight? No. Are they going to give him one? Sure are. And I get it. It's stupid and I hate it, but I get it. I don't think Colby's ever really shown that from any of the metrics I've looked at. He does not appear to be a substantively bigger draw than other people. Bigger than Belal Muhammad? 1,000%. Is he that much bigger than doing Belal Muhammad in London? I don't think so. I think we're working minimal degrees of difference here. So still think it's dumb. At some point there should be some form of meritocracy going on here, even though I know that that's not really the name of the game. And so, yeah, it's dumb, but it makes total sense because why wouldn't something like this happen? I believed too much in the goodness of the UFC, which was my first and final mistake.
Damon, you were also not happy with this announcement. I was more curious of when this decision was made, because I don't think it was that when because Colby was the backup, he automatically got it. I think the buzz that it generated, him stepping on the scale Friday, had Dana go, wow, people were talking about this. I didn't see this coming. And the fact that Dana's own son called him on the phone and was like, what the hell is Colby Covington doing in London? I think that kind of jarred something for him, but that's neither here nor there. But you are the man, Damon, who taught me many, many years ago a very important lesson in this sport. Strike the word deserves from my vocabulary, and that is something that I've done for 6 or 7 years. So why is this so surprising to everybody?
I mean, reality, it shouldn't be surprising, right? When we really think about it, it shouldn't be surprising because this is classic UFC. This is what they do. They try to make fights based on fan interest, even though there's no demonstrable metric that proves that Colby Covington is this draw. He's had a couple of rivalry fights that have drawn well with Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal, but there's no proof out there that Colby is some huge driver to pay-per-view sales, or that people are going out of their way to plunk down $80 to watch him fight. Do people turn on YouTube to see him say stupid things and say crazy things and threaten broadcasters and, say things that are just, skirting the edge of all sorts of problematic? Sure. Is that going to be worth $80 to watch him fight on pay-per-view? Probably not. So I don't know where's this idea that he's this huge star, this huge needle mover that people want to see fight. I guarantee you bring back Nate Diaz and do him and Leon Edwards too. That does double what Colby Covington's about to do, which I'm shocked they didn't try that one. So no, it doesn't surprise me. I think, one thing I will give Colby credit for, as I was thinking about this over the last couple of days, is that, when you really think about it, him coming back kind of out of the shadows, out of nowhere after going in the witness protection program for the last year, is that it just surprised people. We hadn't heard from him. He's been quiet. He didn't comment after Leon knocked out Usman. He didn't comment, any of the other fights being made. He didn't comment on anything happening. He went completely disappeared off the map, as a joke in witness protection after the Jorge Masvidal assault. He just went away, never heard from him. We all kind of forgot about him. And then boom, out of nowhere, he's here. He's at the weigh-ins. He's doing that. And then now he's doing the media circuit again, where he's back saying, things that were relevant in 2020. So, people are suddenly interested again a little bit, but I just hate the fact that, if there weren't other better options available, that just it wouldn't matter if that wasn't the fact. But Bilal Muhammad, I don't care what you think about Bilal Muhammad. You don't have to like Bilal Muhammad. I don't care if you do or not. The guy's unbeaten in his last 9 fights, and he has 3 really quality wins in a row with Wonder Boy, with Vicente Luque, and with Sean Brady. The winner of Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal. Now, you can say Jorge Masvidal has a loss to Colby Covington, but he also has a 3-piece in a soda. And that is a natural storyline to build up a much bigger fight with Leon Edwards. That would be a huge fight comparatively to Colby Covington. Leon Edwards can fight Jorge Masvidal. And I would argue even Gilbert Burns would be a better option if he goes out there and starches Jorge Masvidal, because he would have the 2 wins in a row and just a better overall resume at welterweights than anything Colby Covington has done in the last 5 years. But again, this is the sport we live in. Jed just said it. Weird things happen. Conor McGregor beats a lightweight at welterweight. Michael Chandler, they'll give him a title shot. We've seen other weird things that make this one, the reason it bugs me, or the reason I'm still I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand why Colby suddenly became the guy when you have a fight in 2 weeks that could potentially give you a much bigger, better fight, even if you could argue that Jorge Masvidal doesn't deserve it. No, of course he doesn't really deserve it, but, he has the history with Leon, so it's a story. I just don't understand why you're so emphatic saying he's the number 1 guy and he's getting the title shot. I will say one last thing about this, though. As worked up as we've all been over the last 4 or 5 days since this happened, no contracts have been signed. Nothing's happened yet. We don't know if this fight's actually going to happen. How many guys or girls have been declared the number 1 contender and Dana said they're getting the next shot, and they don't get the next shot? Something happens. Someone gets injured. They want to put a card somewhere that the other guy doesn't want to go to. The timing doesn't work. I mean, Francis Ngannou knocks out Stipe Miocic. The UFC desperately needs a main event 4 months later, and he doesn't want to fight that early, and so they just give an interim title to Ciryl Gane and Derek Lewis, of all people. That's how the UFC operates. They're saying Colby Covington right now. Guess what? Colby Covington slips and falls on a banana peel tomorrow, or, maybe he gets punched in the crowd for threatening John Anik, and then suddenly by August, we're like, oh, it's going to be Gilbert Burns and Leon Edwards. Oh, it's going to be Belal Muhammad and Leon Edwards. This is all right now. A lot of things change in the UFC very rapidly, and so I'm still not completely sold we're actually going to see Colby Covington fight Leon Edwards.
David, I'll do you one better. I'll do you one better, David. You don't need to go to Francis Ngannou as an example for this. Colby has twice talked himself out of title fights already. He was an interim champion and didn't fight for the undisputed belt. They took it from him and made him fight Robbie Lawler, because this man knows how to shoot himself in the foot like very few other people in the history of the sport. He seems to be back in the good graces, but also he did just this week threaten to murder a UFC commentator, a widely beloved employee of the company. So he may already have thrown his title aspirations out the window. In no way is this set in stone. Fully agree with you.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. Honestly, to me, the biggest surprise was not Colby getting a title shot. It was just the announcement and when it happened. Like, if this was April 9th and UFC 287 is over and Gilbert Burns wins a 30-27 decision over Jorge Masvidal and Dana goes up and says Colby's next, I don't think it's getting this much backlash, if you will. There'll be some people who think Bilal Muhammad deserves it, and he does, meritocratically 100%. But I think if the timing was a little bit better, if he just waited 3 weeks for the outcome of that fight, I don't think it's as bad. So let me ask you this, Damon. If Jorge Masvidal goes out there and just puts the boots to Gilbert Burns, flying knee, knocks him out in the first round, will Dana White go on at that table with a microphone in his hand and say, you know what? Maybe we will do Masvidal. Do you think that happens?
I don't know if he'll commit to it on the night, because Dana, for some weird reason, always likes to say we don't make fights the night of the fight, even though he's done it a million times over. And he just did it, 4 days ago. But 100% they'll reconsider. They'll absolutely reconsider, because Masvidal winning is a bigger fight. It is a bigger fight for him to go fight Leon Edwards, especially if they do it in London after what happened the last time they were in London together with the whole three-piece Minnesota. Absolutely, they'll rethink their decision because Masvidal is a much, much bigger star than Colby Covington. And we all talked about earlier, Leon Edwards is still not that guy. He's still not that star. He's not that guy who's going to draw people just because he's Leon Edwards. He needs a rivalry fight. Guess what? Jorge Masvidal is the perfect rivalry fight. And also because Usman's out of the picture now, we can kind of move on from the whole he has 2 losses to Kamaru Usman thing. He got knocked out by Kamaru Usman. We kind of move past that now and we move into the rivalry fight. And absolutely, if he goes out there and just starches Gilbert Burns, which I'll be completely honest, I think a lot of us will probably agree I don't see that happening, but it could. And if it does, 100% they'll start reconsidering it. I don't think he'll call it the night of the fight to say it's over, we're giving it to Jorge, but I think suddenly you'll start seeing things get chipped away at the foundation of Dana White declaring Colby Covington as the number 1 contender because Leon's going to immediately call for it, fans are going to start immediately calling for it, and suddenly people are going to start forgetting about Colby Covington and they're going to be banging the drum for Masvidal to get that fight to go over there and see if he can finish his combo meal with Leon Edwards.
Jed, what do you think? Because look, me and Dana don't have a lot in common. We're both bald. He has considerably much more money than I have. But there is one thing we definitely have in common. We are stubborn as hell. And if we have our feet planted in the sand and people are against us, we're just going to dig deeper. And Dana has probably seen the aftermath of this. And there could be a chance that the Bostonian and him will just dig a little deeper here. But if Masvidal just goes in there and does what the betting odds don't suggest will happen, but if it does, and he goes out there and obliterates Gilbert Burns and everybody, all the momentum is towards Masvidal, do you think Dana will change his mind?
I do. In part because, one, we've seen him do it plenty of times before. He had that famous quote of somebody asked him at a press conference. I don't remember exactly what it was about. It was something like this where he said, "This will never happen." And it's like, you said that ship had sailed. What happened? Why are we doing it? He's like, well, the ship turned around and sailed right back. And I think that's where we're at for all the reasons Damon said. Most importantly, though, which Damon didn't really mention, the outcome is so much better if Masvidal wins, because that's the part of this that is maybe more frustrating is what comes next, right? Like, I'm going to pick Leon Edwards to beat Colby Covington should they fight. I'd pick the same for Jorge Masvidal should they rematch, or I guess fight. They did. It's not a fight. But what if he doesn't win, right? Like, it won't be cataclysmic because, again, Leon Edwards isn't some huge star that you're losing. But it's way better for the company to have Jorge Masvidal with the belt. You have a built-in fight with Colby Covington that you can go to if you needed to. Or, more likely, Masvidal versus Conor McGregor for the welterweight belt is the biggest fight the UFC can make with people currently on its roster right now. Like, I believe that Conor McGregor versus Jorge Masvidal in any instance is the biggest fight the UFC can currently construct. I don't think Conor is incentivized really to take that fight. However, Masvidal has the welterweight belt. You got that 12 pounds of gold on the line. It's the biggest fight you can do. It's just better. Covington versus McGregor isn't a bad business, but it's not great. That fight's probably going to go one way, which isn't nearly as lucrative for the UFC to have Colby Covington lay on Conor McGregor for 5 rounds. And then once Colby's done that, he's going to be impossible to work with. He is going to be impossible to get him to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. Like, shit just ain't going to happen. And so then we're looking at a year, 18 months down the line, the welterweight division is in shambles because you let Colby Covington get a belt. And that's probably not the best business decision you could ever make. Whereas giving Masvidal a chance most likely just keeps Leon in charge, which seems to be working and fine for you. And even if it doesn't, you're creating a situation that's just better for you. So I think from a promotional standpoint of matchmaking and looking at how outcomes can play out, it's much better for Masvidal to get this title fight. And it's under the exact same auspices as Covington getting it. Of like, well, they're there to sell tickets, not be the most deserving challenger. So I think that cooler heads will eventually prevail if Masvidal can flying knee Gilbert Burns' face off. If he can't, which I think is far more likely outcome, all right, Colby Covington's fighting Leon Edwards in October. Cool. That's where we're going to be.
The funniest part about this whole thing is that while no one understands why Colby's getting the opportunity, everyone understands why Jorge would get the opportunity, because having talked to both Gilbert Burns and Belal Muhammad over the last 3 days, Bilal Muhammad said, even on his 9-fight unbeaten streak, he's like, I was only worried about Masvidal. If Masvidal beat Gilbert, I was just pretty much resigning that I was going to fight Colby. Like, he wasn't even saying, I'm going to make a big, drama show about not getting the title shot. He said, if Masvidal won, I was pretty much assuming I was going to fight Colby. And Gilbert Burns just said the same thing. Gilbert Burns said, I just, when Leon won, I just immediately felt like my fight got bigger because everyone's going to wonder if Masvidal can beat me. Can he get the title shot? Everyone's on board with that one, even though it doesn't really make sense when you think of Masvidal's overall record. But there's not a person on earth who logically looks at the fight and says, man, Colby Covington, really, this is a great matchup. This should really happen. Nobody's saying that. Everybody is, even the guys who are ahead of it. Belal Muhammad is saying, yeah, if Masvidal won, I pretty much assumed I was going to have to fight Colby and I wasn't getting the title shot. Even he logically can say, yeah, I get it. And when that happens, then it's a big fight because everyone sees the marketability in that fight. It like I said, it just boggles my mind how we've come to Colby Covington on this date, 2 weeks ahead of a fight that could absolutely make a bigger fight.
Yeah, the whole thing with Belal has been really interesting because I've kind of predicted his path through all of this, through his entire run to get to this point. Just a lot of things, a lot of call outs he had like after these big wins just didn't make a lot of sense when like Khamzat was right there. And then he would go and do the media interviews afterwards. And then he would pivot to Khamzat and it was just too little too late. And I think if he handled things a little bit differently in those moments, he'd be in a better spot right now, but that's neither here nor there. I actually think he's handled himself pretty well. He's getting out there. And I want to go back to the interview that I did with Colby Damon, because he said some pretty crazy stuff as he typically does. He issues the threat to John Anik, which, by the way, if you just saw the clip, I never asked him about John Anik. John Anik's name never came out of my mouth. It was just a general question, and he brought that up on his own. And everybody watching this right now, or anybody hearing the sound of my voice, if you know me long enough, you know the respect and admiration I have for John Anik, so I'd never put him in that position anyways. I think he's one of the best commentators, not just in combat sports, not just in MMA, but in all of sports. I hold John Anik in such high regard, so that was a very uncomfortable moment. So I could have taken two lanes with this. I could have just like doubled down on it and like kept it going, and I just felt like that wasn't the right thing to do. Or I could just pivot immediately and just keep the uncomfort level at a certain point. I chose the latter, pivoted immediately, moved on to other things. But Damon Belal, and you talk to him, he has sort of used this threat to issue one of his own to Colby, saying that if he sees him in Miami, he's just going to go up and slap him across the face. He's publicly having John's back. He's doing interviews with you and did one with ESPN, TMC. He's doing them with everybody. So did Colby actually do Bilal Muhammad a favor with that comment? Because more people seem to be jumping on Team Bilal Muhammad than ever before, and it's mostly because of this.
There are a few instances in the sport where a guy or girl who doesn't really have a ton of fan support suddenly becomes a bit of a fan favorite when they get passed over badly for a title fight. It's happened a couple times in history. Now, people probably won't remember the outcry, but there was a pretty sizable outcry when Johnny Hendricks was the number one contender and the UFC just gave Nick Diaz a title shot against George St. Pierre for no reason whatsoever. Now, of course, that was a much bigger fight, and we all agree it was a much bigger fight, but at the time, Johnny Hendricks was on this huge winning streak, and he was clearly the number one contender, and it kind of built people into backing him a little bit. And then when the fight did happen, it actually did make the George St. Pierre Johnny Hendricks fight a little bit bigger, and it felt bigger. Bilal Muhammad is not that guy. He's not a star. He's not an overly beloved fighter. He doesn't have a ton of people banging the drum and saying he's this or he's that, and he's great, and he's being screwed. But first off, when you pass him over for a guy that nobody generally seems to like all that much, there's one, because he was clearly the guy who deserved, quote unquote, as you and I know about using that word, deserved the title shot, 9-fight unbeaten streak, all those things. But then Colby coming out and attacking a guy that, as you said, is so universally beloved, it just gave Bilal the perfect ammunition to go after him, because there's just certain people you can't say those things about and imagine that others are not going to turn against you for it. So Belal was so smart in doing the interview with me, which the clip, blew up yesterday. He did interviews with a lot of people, and that has continuously been the thing that everyone's grabbed onto, because threatening Jon Anik and threatening to orphan his kids and stuff is such a weird, strange, and also really aggressive threat to make to a freaking play-by-play guy who is, again, universally loved. And then Bilal Muhammad, who does a podcast on Anik and Florian's podcast network, because he did an interview with them first. Somehow Jon Anik is the bad guy. Bilal Muhammad taking that and running with it is brilliant. It's probably the best marketing he's had for a title fight yet, and it has nothing to do with Leon Edwards or the championship. Him backing Jon Anik and saying, if I see you in Miami, it's on site, and if you even look at him sideways, I'm going to come over and slap you in your face, which, will it actually happen? I don't know. We know things have not worked out very well for Colby Covington in street fights lately, so I don't know if that would actually happen, but it's brilliant. It's probably the best bit of marketing that Bilal's had in his entire career. And I love that he's running with it, because people now suddenly care. People who were kind of, not saying against him, but just kind of like indifferent to him, now have two things to run with. One, he's getting screwed over for the title shot he probably earned. And two, he's backing up Jon Anik, a guy that everyone loves.
Jed, what do you think about that? Because I think he did him a favor. I don't know if this sort of buzz and reaction will leap him over Colby, but at least it generates buzz for a potential fight with Colby. Like, if Masvidal wins, the UFC has two pretty interesting fights. They could just run two clips back to back to sell both of those fights. You could do Belal versus Colby. It's actually got some interest and some heat on it. It was just kind of a thing before, and it was a fight I never thought would happen unless Colby won the belt and Belal just kept winning and got his way up there. But now, for the first time since Belal has called him out like a couple of wins ago, this fight is actually interesting. It could happen. And I think the way Belal has handled this has been brilliant. Did Colby actually do him a favor with just that out of the box, out of nowhere comment about Jon Anik?
Theoretically, yes. Practically, not really. It all makes sense from a hypothetical standpoint. The problem is, as we've all sort of nudged to during this whole thing, is all of it hinges on Jorge Masvidal beating Gilbert Burns, and that's not going to happen. So it's all kind of moot. Like, theoretically, yes. I think that one, I agree. Good for Belal to pick the ball up and run. There's at least something here to build off of, and he didn't fumble the bag as he has been known to do. So congrats on that. That's good. Maybe this sets him up for a fight with Colby down the line, should Colby win the belt, etc. But even then, I still don't think that's likely, because if Colby wins the belt, he's going to try and fight Conor. He's going to try and not defend the belt. He's going to call out to fight Israel Adesanya or Alex Pereira. He's going to not do the thing of defending against deserving no-named or names you can't remember despite their names. Like, he's not going to fight those dudes. So, yes, in some world where Masvidal does win and the UFC / Dana White do decide to walk back their previous statements and Masvidal gets the title fight, then Colby is in an okay position, because he gets to say the UFC's screwing me out of the title shot they guaranteed me, and they're giving it to a guy I just beat. This is garbage, and now they're making me fight this dude, and nobody yeah, sure. I just think it's all moot. Like, I don't think this matters. I will be fairly surprised if we see Belal Muhammad and Colby Covington fight within the next 12 months. And I won't be at all surprised if Belal Muhammad is secretly 2 wins away from getting a title shot, which sucks so hard for the man. But you adopted the Leon Edwards mantle. They gave Leon a shot, and now you're the next guy in that realm. Sucks to be you. Sorry about it.
Real quick, like 30 seconds or less for each of you. Jed, I'll start with you. Will the UFC say or do anything about what Colby said about Jon Anik? Will they say anything, or will this be we have 700 maniacs on the roster, blah, blah, blah?
No, it's a clown show organization. This is very seriously should not be treated with kid gloves. They should come out and make a statement. Like, if this were literally any other, not even sports organization, a professional organization, wherein one contractor threatened the life of an employee, they would be publicly reprimanded, and that's what should happen here. But clown show. It's a clown show organization, garbage nonsense. Oh, he didn't mean it, whatever. It's fucking bullshit. But nothing's gonna happen.
Damon?
The organization didn't put out a statement when the president of the company got caught on camera slapping his wife. Nobody said a word. No one said do you think they're actually going to say something to actually back John Anik against Colby? No, absolutely not. They're not going to say a word. If Colby, if Dana does eventually address it, oh, they're fighters. This is fighting. This isn't ballerina. They're
That's
fighters.
the problem, though. They're
Things.
not. Colby Covington is a fighter. He threatened a non-fighter. It would be stupid and unacceptable if this was him threatening the life of any other fighter, but at least you can lean on that. This is him threatening an employee who has never stepped foot in the cage. It is basically unacceptable, and there's not a chance in hell they're going to do shit about this.
Nothing.
Well, round 2 is over. Let's go to round 3. The point for round 2 goes to Jed Meshew. It's 1-1. Couple of good rounds. Let's put a bow on UFC 286 real quick. Co-main event, Justin Gaethje, decision win against Rafael Fiziev. Great fight. Gaethje showing a lot of smarts. He lured Fiziev into his world, his kind of a fight, and then turned up the technique volume in round 3 to about a 20. So I love the fight, Damon. I love the performance. How did you grade Gaethje's victory, and is it the Dustin Poirier rematch next?
Yeah, it's the Dustin Poirier rematch. It's the only one that really makes sense. I mean, logically, Dustin Poirier should be fighting Beneil Dariush, but he turned that one down for some unknown reason because Beneil apparently wasn't a big enough star. So he's going to fight Justin Gaethje instead. So yeah, it's the only fight that makes sense. Justin Gaethje, huge credit, man. I mean, to go out there and beat just an absolute savage in Rafael Fiziev, as we learned his actual last name is. To go out there and have that first round with the speed and the kicks and everything that Fiziev was doing well, and then to come back and beat him in rounds 2 and 3. Also, I want to eliminate this weird narrative suddenly that it was a controversial decision. I don't think it was controversial at all. I thought Justin Gaethje won. Don't get me wrong. You know, Fiziev had a great performance, but I thought Gaethje won. But Gaethje going out there and beating a guy who was lower than him in the rankings, who was kind of like the next up and coming, you know, the next guy, so to speak, go out there and vanquish him in such impressive fashion and basically do what Justin Gaethje always does, just walk through people like the Terminator and find a way to beat them, even though he's not technically probably the most skilled guy in the cage doing what he's doing. No one's going to argue that Rafael Fiziev is not the better overall striker than Justin Gaethje, but Justin Gaethje still found a way to be. I mean, even threw in a takedown, for Christ's sake. He shut up all the people like me who say, man, you're an All-American wrestler from a college that now, by the way, has another All-American wrestler. They crowned their second one ever this past week at the NCAA championships. But you're an All-American wrestler, use your wrestling, and he shut us all up by actually going for a takedown. 2 of them, he landed one. So, yeah, it's an incredible performance from Gaethje. He understands he's at the tail end of his career. He said, I don't have much time left. I think the Poirier rematch is a big fight. It's a easy main event, and I'm telling you could easily do a 5-round main event on a pay-per-view, and it boosts whatever pay-per-view it's on. So that's absolutely the fight. And kudos to Gaethje, man. That guy just continuously finds ways to prove people wrong. When it looks like maybe he's done or maybe he's on a downgrade, he just keeps pulling them out.
Jed, grade for Gaethje's win, and are we doing Poirier again?
I mean, A plus, and we're for sure doing Poirier. Damon touched on it at the end there. This is one of the rare fights that can headline a pay-per-view that will not have a belt on the line. Like, if the UFC just came out tomorrow and was like UFC 290, wherever that event will end up taking place, the main event is Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje. You can even just go ahead and say, because functionally it will be true, lightweight title shots on the line. Nobody is batting an eye. Nobody's being like, this card needs a little bit more juice to it or whatever. We're all going to be fanboying out over it, as we should. And it's going to do well on pay-per-view. Poirier is a star. Gaethje's not like a huge star, but well-known. And their fight, you promote that as this was the fight of the year 5 years ago, I think. I think it was the 2017 was when they fought. fight of the year. We're running it back with a lightweight title shot on the line. You get Islam Makhachev to show up just to sit cage side for his next guy. I mean, it's the whole shebang. Or you can just have it as the co-main event, a 5-round co-main event. Either or works. And yeah, and we talked about it a lot. The top of the lightweight division likes to squat, kind of play round robin with each other. Credit to Gaethje. He took the challenge. He fought somebody behind him, gave somebody an opportunity. Most people were not picking him to win, and he showed he still got it. He says he's got one more run of the title left in him. I'd love to see it. I don't think he'll get the belt, but I'd love to see him get one more chance because he's the most exciting fighter I've ever seen fist fight. So I will always be happy to watch him. And are you going to run back a fight of the year? It's the only thing to do. There's no other option.
Who is the low-key MVP of UFC 286, Jed?
Oh, low-key MVP of 286. I think I said this on the post show. I think this was where I picked off. And I'm still going with it. Yanal Ashmas. Like, man got robbed of a bonus. Absolute thievery going on, giving Gunnar Nelson a bonus. Not that his armbar was bad or whatever, but like it was even money for Gunnar Nelson to submit Brian Barber. Like, we all knew it was going to happen there. It's not cool, but Ashmas delivers one of the best knockouts of the year. That left hand landing on Sam Patterson as Patterson's falling down, and then just a savage follow-up, like on a card that didn't frankly have a ton of other stuff that was super compelling. That was awesome. And the fact that he doesn't get a bonus was such nonsense. So, Ashmas, props to you.
Damon, low-key MVP.
I mean, I want to say the CLD nickname just because it gave us things to talk about for days after is how hilarious it was that was like suddenly an incredible nickname that is his initials. I almost wanted to say Veronica Hardy coming back from 3 years away and actually pulling off a pretty impressive win the way she did, but I'm going to go with Muhammad Mokaev because even though he may not be quite the prospect that we all built him into being, we talked about this on our ranking show the other day, the fact that he got caught in that knee bar and watched his knee just absolutely get shredded and he still managed to fight through that and then come back and get a win. I thought that was so impressive. And if he had I think if he had just gone out there and just starched Jafel Filo, I don't think we'd really be talking about all that much because we'd say, well, it was expected. But the fact that he had to fight through that knee bar, a submission that looked like it 100% should have finished him, and then he still went out there and then got the submission of his own like minutes later, huge. And I think that was the narrative. That was probably the biggest narrative coming off the prelims was Muhammad Mokaev over everybody else. And even, for the most part in the early part of the main card, because no one really buzzed about Marvin Vettori going out there and winning a 29-28 decision because that's what Marvin Vettori does. Jennifer Maia beating previously undefeated Casey O'Neill. No one seemed to really care. And Gunnar Nelson loved the dude going out there and armbarring a dude who he's just that much better than on the ground isn't all that surprising. But Muhammad Mokaev doing what he did was shocking and quite a moment for that card.
Well, that's UFC 286. Let's move on to this Saturday. The point for round 3 goes to...
This Saturday is a tough hang, man.
Damon Martin, it's 2-1. Jed's face, his reaction, the sound tells us everything. So we're going to start with you, Jed. Let's go right into this. UFC San Antonio, 13 fights on the docket. Early start time. You got a 4 p.m. prelims Eastern time, 7 p.m. main card. A main event that we're going to talk about in a moment. A really good main event between Marlon, Vera, and Cory Sandhagen. What are your thoughts on this first post-286 offering from the Ultimate Fighting Championship?
My thoughts can be summed up. I'm going to read you a line from the Wikipedia page of this event. A bantamweight bout between Marlon Vera and former interim bantamweight championship challenger Cory Sandhagen expected to headline. They were previously expected to headline UFC Fight Night Andrade versus Blanchfield, but were rescheduled to this event for unknown reasons. Those reasons are only unknown if you cannot read, because if you can then just scroll slightly down the page and look at the lineup and say, totally get why they put this very, very fun, great fight on to headline this event, which otherwise would be headlined by Holly Holm versus Yana Santos Nekunitskaya. This is a tough card outside of the main event. There are 3 flyweight bouts on this. You know my love for flyweights. You've heard no bets barred. That's the card, realistically. Like, Nate Landwehr is usually a good time, so he gets to fight. But, I mean, it's a tough hang, Mike. And I'll tell you why. And also, it's not an unknown reason why it's a tough hang. There's just other shit going on in the world, and they're not really focused on this event. They had 2 pay-per-views this month. Asking them to put together that many great cards is a lot, and they've got another pay-per-view in 2 weeks. So we're just here. We've got a great main event, and there are, I don't know, like 11 other fights, looks like 12 other fights going on, 11 other fights, and a really good main event. Yeah, that's the full breakdown on this card. It is tough sledding to find something that is compelling in like real ways.
Damon Jed sold that card so well. The viewership for Saturday's ESPN Plus offering is going to get jacked up because of what Jed just said. Can you top it? Can you top that?
There are 2 women's bantamweight fights on the card, Mike. I don't make the rules. 2 of them. They had like 7 women's bantamweight fights in the entirety of 2022. They put 2 on this card. It's bad, man. It's bad card.
So there were rumors. If you guys probably heard this, I know I mentioned it, and I think Ariel may have mentioned it on the MMA Hour. There were rumors at one point the UFC was considering doing a all women's card for this event, and I had heard very, very early on, that there was even consideration for Macy Barber versus Andrea Lee to be the co-main of the main event. Co-main, I think, was the main one. That should tell you where this card started and where it ended up. Cory Sandhagen and Marlon Cheeto Vera in phenomenal main event. Incredible main event. Deserves all the flowers. It's going to be awesome. I can't imagine it's going to be anything other than awesome. But when you look down the rest of this card, it's just really bad. And also, let me just mention, in terms of like the matchmakers or ESPN or UFC or whoever's doing the card order here, I understand you try to build up the prelims for a pay-per-view because you want people to get a compelling fight to then go buy the $80 pay-per-view. Why Manel Kape versus Alex Perez is on the prelims and not the co-main event over a fight that, let's just be honest, no one really cares all that much about, between Holly Holm and Yana Santos? How that is on the prelims versus being the co-main event, which is outside of the main event, by far the most interesting fight on this entire card, I have no idea. So that in and of itself makes me angry, because that fight is so far down. I mean, when you look at, again, I understand it's on ESPN Plus, so the prelims and the main card kind of blend together. But Andrea Lee, Macy Barber on the main card, Chidi Njokuani and Albert Duraev's on the main card. I like Nate Landwehr. That seems like a pretty fun fight, although Austin Lingo is a kind of a late-ish replacement, maybe not as much. But yeah, how Alex Perez and Manel Kape is not the actual co-main events of this fight card, I have zero idea. So yeah, it's rough. The fans in San Antonio, I hope you get your money's worth with the main event, because otherwise you're going to be real disappointed when this one's over.
Perez Kape's second fight of the main card is going to follow what should be a short fight between Chidi Njokuani and Albert
it is
Duraev.
On the main card now.
Yeah, it's on the main card. It's on the main card.
Okay. Whew, I was going to say, man,
it really should just be the co-main event, though. Like,
yeah,
I know that you're putting Holly Holm there because Holly Holm is Holly Holm, but like, no one cares, as Damon said. And you at least could maybe get some juice by putting Manel Kape, Alex Perez there, as be like, oh, these people got billing above Holly Holm. Maybe there's something to look at here, which there is in the flyweight division. Both of them are top 10 flyweights and not terribly far off of title shots. So it's a tough hang. It's a tough card. There's one really good thing about this card, Mike. Are we about to do like low-key banger?
I mean, sure. Chuck one out of there.
It's not a low-key banger. It has nothing to do with the quality of the fight, which it will be awful. The fight itself will not be good. It may be entertaining. The quality of it won't be good, but it's a good thing, guys. This is for us. This is a little inside baseball. You know how for the last year we've really struggled to find 15 women to put in the women's bantamweight rankings? The opener the curtain jerker is a women's bantamweight bout. So one of those women can at least take the number 15 spot. Whoever wins is going to be ranked by virtue of there literally not being another candidate worthy of it. So the stakes start right at the beginning of the night, guys.
Wow.
And to add to the stakes of this, tell you just how committed we all are to this. I think we all know on the staff. I have a hard time taking time off work. I tend to work a lot, and I like my job very much. I'm actually taking this weekend off to go to a horror movie convention, so I'm actually going to miss this card. And I don't really think I'm going to miss all that much outside of coming back and very much when I get home, watching the main event. That's the one thing I'm excited to see. And you know what? I may actually make it home in time just for the main event. And I'm like, you know what? That's actually pretty good timing.
Well, let's talk about it real quick, Damon. Like you said, main event is great. Marlon Vera on a roll, 4 wins in a row, 10-2 over his last 12. You can make a case that he should be 11-1 over his last 12. If we talk about the Song Yudong fight, but that doesn't really matter here. Fighting Cory Sandhagen, who coincidentally enough looked really good in his win over Song Yudong, former interim title challenger. Bantamweight is deep. It's fun. Second best division in the sport. But it's a mess right now, Damon. Like all these divisions, it is a gosh darn mess. What is on the line here for these two guys with this division being as messy as it is right now?
You're pretty much playing either the Merab Dvalishvili or potentially the Sean O'Malley sweepstakes, depending on how this fight plays out. Because as much as Sean O'Malley is saying I'm the number 1 contender and I'm next in line, the fact that Henry Cejudo and Aljamain Sterling aren't fighting until May puts it in real jeopardy that Sean O'Malley won't fight again until 2024, because there is a really good chance, depending on how that fight plays out, that the winner of that fight does not fight again until the end of the year or maybe early next year. And once again, just like the Colby Covington thing, no contracts are signed, promises are made all the time. And yes, Sean O'Malley would be the biggest fight possible for Aljamain or Henry Cejudo. The reality is that, he would end up sitting out for the better part of a year or more to get the winner of that. And again, you're still not even guaranteed that. I mean, Aljamain Sterling has dealt with all sorts of injuries, bicep injuries, neck injuries, wrist injuries. If he goes through and actually beats Henry Cejudo, he could be out for another year. Then maybe you do a interim title, and that could be the case. So this is really coming down to the Merab and or O'Malley sweepstakes for the winner of this fight. For Cory Sandhagen, I know he said he wants to call out Sean O'Malley. I know he said he kind of figures Merab is probably going to be the guy because he doesn't know if O'Malley will actually fight him. But again, I think it all comes down to timing. If Sandhagen can go out there and win impressively, and then they do an interim title with him and O'Malley, that would make a lot of sense. Obviously, if Cheeto wins, him and O'Malley too is a monstrous fight, probably bigger than the title fight, and that would also make a lot of sense for an interim title. And then Merab is kind of the man left out. But, as we all know, he's not going to fight Aljamain. So until Aljamain is no longer the champion or he leaves the division, Merab is going to be kind of like the guy in no man's land. So I think that's really what it comes down to. Depending on how the fight plays out and the timing of this with the title fight, it's either an O'Malley or a Merab Dvalishvili sweepstakes.
Jed, what's on the line here?
I don't know. Nothing. Because I don't think it's either of those. Like if Cheeto wins, I think they bench him. Like that's what I would do. If Cheeto wins, like you can't have him continue to fight people because he's the second biggest star in the division behind O'Malley. So I think if Cheeto wins, you're benching him and you're seeing what plays out at 288, how Cejudo Sterling shakes out, all of that. Unless I think you're just benching him until maybe the end of the year or early next year for a title fight. Be that against O'Malley in the interim basis, what have you. If Sandhagen wins, God love him. Like he might actually end up fighting Merab just because it'll give Merab something to do. I don't think the UFC will be that upset if Sandhagen wins or loses that fight. So that might make sense. But I think the fight that I would hope to see happen here is that Sandhagen would fight Adrian Yanez, the winner of Yanez Font, because that fight makes sense. Like bantamweight's deep because they opted to do this Henry Cejudo nonsense. It's a little bit jammed up at the moment, and because Cheeto Vera wants to stay active, it's staying a little bit jammed up. So I don't think either man is getting much out of this other than, I mean, Cheeto can win this and not fight again. If he wins this, he can sit and wait for a title shot. Whether he will choose to do that, whole different story. If Sandhagen wins, he's still going to have to fight somebody, and maybe it's Marab, maybe it's somebody else, but so it's not a title shot is theoretically at stake, but I think realistically it's a long time on the shelf for one of them, and it's fighting Marab or Adrian Yanez next for the other.
All right. Well, that's UFC San Antonio. We'll talk more about it on the preview show tomorrow, but point for round 4 goes to Jed Meshew with his positive energy. It's 2-2. And that means it's time for the knockout round. 1 minute for each of these gentlemen. And then you, the fine listeners of this program, will decide the winners. You can cast your vote. I believe the poll is up right now. And we'll do the knockout round question. Jed, since you're preparing for your Price is Right television debut, what are we going to do here? Are you going to play the statistics, play the historical numbers, and pass this on over to Damon? Or are you just going to screw up the norm like you typically do and go first with this question?
You know what? I'll go first. Let's mix it up a little bit. You got to be prepared in case I don't have the option to pass the showcase. I got to be ready to stay on my feet either way. So let's test some new muscles. Let's go first.
Okay. Well, if you watched the MMA Hour yesterday, you may have seen a person join the program. His name was Khamzat Chimaev. Had a lot to say about a lot of different things, whether he could fight at 185 or 205 or 170. He says he's down for all three. And typically, Jed, after these cards, myself and my best friend Alexander K. Lee, we like to play matchmaker. We try to get no points by predicting the correct matchup. So here we are. It is March 23rd, 2023. Khamzat Chimaev wants to fight in July. Who are we matching him up with? Try to get yourself an no point here. Is it at 170? Is it 185? Is it 205? What is the matchup
question? Before we begin, to clarify, is this who I would like, or is this what I believe will happen? Is this the magic wand to take the no phrase, or is this the predictive?
This is the predictive. We're going with the predictive.
Okay.
Magic wand is fun, but predictive is a little more compelling.
That's why I wanted to clarify. All right. Okay.
So predictive, 1 minute on the clock. Khamzat Chimaev versus question mark. Go.
I believe in July we are going to see Khamzat Chimaev face the one, the only, Paulo Costa. It's going to be a middleweight bout. There is a beef there. We know what happened at, I don't even remember the event. Was that the numbers all blurred together for me. The last time he was fighting. We were supposed to fight Nate, whatever, the whole showdown, the Costa stuff happened. There was all that footage about, them beefing with each other. They've built this, and we just broke earlier this week. I want to say Guilherme Cruz is the one who broke it, but that might not be true, so don't quote me on it. Paulo Costa has re-signed with the UFC, multi-fight deal. He's back. The talk was a long time. He was going to PFL. He's going to do it. Nope, he's back. And what do you do with that guy? You put him in the fight that he wants. You get Khamzat a fight over a top 5 middleweight. And then with the win, it is entirely reasonable and the correct move for Khamzat to challenge for the UFC middleweight championship later at the end of this year.
Yes, Paulo Costa has not re-signed just yet. He has agreed to the terms, but pen has not gone to paper yet. And with Paulo Costa, you never know. But I like that one. There's other options in play for Paulo Costa. He called it another name as well, Sean Strickland. Who knows what will happen? But Damon, we go to you. Khamzat Chimaev versus question mark. Jed went with Paulo Costa. What is your matchmaking prediction for Khamzat Chimaev? What weight class will it take place? 1 minute on the clock. Go.
Well, it's going to be a middleweight, and I think we forget Dana White actually said at the post-fight press conference he was looking at October in Abu Dhabi, so I don't know if Khamzat's going to actually be back sooner than that. It seems like they're really trying to build up that Abu Dhabi card, and for that, whether it's July or October, I think the fight that makes the most sense and the one that would help Khamzat get to where he's going is the fight with Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker is clearly the other best middleweight, not named Israel Adesanya or Alex Pereira. And he is kind of, again, much like Barab, a bit in no man's land because he's already lost Adesanya twice. But That would put him in a big fight against Khamzat. That is a co-main event on a pay-per-view. That is a huge fight, and it would prove whether or not Khamzat is really the real deal at middleweight. It doesn't have the same rivalry stakes as the Paulo Costa fight, but you're also not risking one of your biggest stars against kind of a problematic superstar in Paulo Costa. So I think Robert Whittaker is the fight, and it will declare one of them as the number one contender in the division at middleweight.
There you go. Man, Khamzat versus Robert Whittaker scratches me right where I itch. That's a fascinating fight, but it's not up to me. It's not up to me to decide here. Both those fights are intriguing and fascinating in their own ways. Is it the build that you want? Is it the actual in-cage product that stimulates you? Lots to break down here. So cast your votes right now. Casey will tally them all up, and then he will announce the winner in a matter of seconds. Tomorrow, programming note, 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll be on the Twitter Spaces for Heck of a Morning. 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Preview show for UFC San Antonio. We'll get a little more in-depth in the Marlon Vera versus Cory Sandhagen main event, which is absolutely tremendous. Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, we'll have the People's Pre-Fight Show, so we'll answer all of your questions. We'll have post-fight show after UFC San Antonio, all that fun stuff, and then 8K and I will be back on Sunday for an audio version of On to the Next One. Lots to be excited about and then it's a rare week off for the UFC, and then we're moving on to Miami, Florida for UFC 287 for
Are you just forgetting about Masvidal Boxing 4? Come on now. Game Bread Boxing 4. Are you forgetting about Jose Aldo and Jared? I know, but come on now. That's a big event. Look at all the tickets they've sold.
Listen, you don't think my fingers on the pulse that in PFL and the return of the PFL? I mean, forget the UFC. The UFC had a card. They're number 3, baby.
Isn't that also Final Four weekend?
And one of the most stacked Bellator cards ever with Marcelo Golm headlining. So I mean, come on now, you can't get much bigger.
To be fair, at that Bellator card, that main event is garbo, but the rest of the card's actually pretty good. The rest of the card's actually pretty good.
The rest of the card's actually solid. It's a bad main event though. I'm Bryce Meredith's fighting on the undercard. I like him a lot. There's actually a pretty good undercard, but man, that's like one of those. That's the opposite of UFC San Antonio. There's like one fight on UFC San Antonio, and Bellator is the opposite. No one cares about the main event, but the undercard is actually pretty good.
It's very solid, very solid. Casey, how are we doing with the votes? Is this a runaway? Is the verdict in? Are we still compiling votes? Is it very close? Where are we at?
I think we have a winner.
Okay.
We have a winner. All right. Get your votes in. I'm ending the poll in just a few seconds. Come on,
I think we have a winner.
Get your votes in.
Well, I want the last second. You never know. Might get a big rush. All right. Your winner today with 69% of the votes is...
Holy shit.
Nice, by the way.
Guys. Jed Meshew.
Jed gets it done. Wow.
It's because I went first.
He's been on one the last couple of weeks. Yeah.
It's because I went first, because Paulo Costa is obviously the right answer. Damon was in a box where he then couldn't say it the same. He was like, well, Paulo Costa makes too much sense.
It is a bigger fight. I could be honest about that. It is the bigger fight. It is.
Yeah. It's the fight that's built up that makes sense. Also, like, Khamzat might just lose to Whittaker. And if Whittaker beats Khamzat and Izzy does win the 4 match or whatever, like, it's just middleweight has a real potential to be a cluster very soon. So.
Yes, of course, because there's a title fight coming up for the middleweight title between Brendan Allen and Jack Hermanson. Woo! Big one in June. All the gold.
We were talking about it off air. That's very middleweighty.
100%. Jed, you get the victory. You get 30 seconds. You get to do a victory lap. You don't get to do the Bob Barker and say, have your pets spayed and neutered, but you can still say stuff. By the way, I just saw a report as we were recording, potentially a meeting between the Fight Circus folk and the Ryzen folk. How about that? A little collab? That's a dream collab.
They're doing things in the circus. 2 weeks, guys. Not this weekend, next weekend, the same weekend as the Masvidal boxing. But I want to use this time to not walk back anything I said, stand by everything I said. I do think that we didn't give Vera Sandhagen as much props. This is as good of a fight as you could possibly make at bantamweight. The rest of that card, we talked about it. That main event is worth the price of admission. So I say this to you all the time. This is a weekend where you can absolutely come to MMAfighting.com, great website. You can spend the time with your family, do something else. But I would highly recommend just keep the phone on you, download the ESPN app, ESPN Plus, and then I don't know what time the main event's going to roll out, but when it does, that's when you open up the phone. The main event is must-see television. For everything else, you come to MMAfighting.com, great website. We'll get you all the best highlights, all the recaps, everything you need. That's my 2 cents. It's been a pleasure as always.
And that 2 cents is worth a couple of hundo right there. Damon, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with Jed. 9:30, I think, is around when it should start. Watch Sandhagen Vera. That's 100% worth your time. Not much else on there, so enjoy your weekend.
There you go. That's it. Hit the music, Casey. We are done. Appreciate y'all watching the program, watching all of the stuff, and that's it for BTL. Back next week to recap UFC San Antonio, get you ready for Bellator, PFL, Game Bred Boxing, and so much more. So until then, everybody, for Jed Bashu, Damon Martin, EKC on the ones and twos, the iconic voice of Esterlin, perhaps will take you home. I am Mike Heck. Back next week on Between the Links. Good night, everybody.
Love y'all.
This has been Between the Links, an MMA Fighting production on the Vox Media Network.
Ha 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 ha!